Hello class, and welcome to lecture 27 of Philosophy 205. In this lecture, we discuss reliability theories of knowledge. Reliability theories represent yet another shift in the way we think about knowledge. We've already shifted from foundationalism to coherentism, which represented a shift in thinking about the structure of knowledge. Foundationalism said it started from beliefs that were guaranteed to be true and built up. Coherentism said all our beliefs were roughly on the same level, and the goal was to make them coherent. Reliability doesn't propose a new structure. It says we're looking at the entire issue from the wrong perspective. So the radical question reliability theories ask is this: is the answer outside our heads? Both foundationalism and coherentism tried to explain what makes a true belief knowledge by appealing to what's present within our own minds, what we can think about and realize about our own beliefs. Reliabilism says that we don't need to look there. In fact, we probably shouldn't be looking there. We should be looking elsewhere to figure out what turns true belief into knowledge. First of all, to motivate this, let's take a look at the problems with foundationalism and coherentism. The main problem with foundationalism was that it seemed too poor. There isn't enough in the foundation to build up the knowledge that we want. And we can trace this back to Descartes' goal of finding internal certainty. He wanted to be able to prove to himself without any doubt that what he believed was true. Now this led him to a focus on mental states, because he thought mental states are something we can be certain about, and so we have to start there. But once you make that claim, that we have to start with knowledge of our own mental states, it's hard to reach conclusions about the world. So once again, he thought we had to focus on, well, there's this patch of colors in my vision right now, and then somehow we would have to conclude that because I'm having these colors appear to me in my vision, therefore there's a desk in front of me. And it's not clear how you can do that while maintaining the level of certainty he was looking for. So that looks like a problem. How do we get from beliefs just about our own minds to beliefs about things other than our own mind? Next, coherentism has a problem of how it connects to the world. Once again, coherentism says that beliefs are justified by being part of a coherent system of beliefs. So coherentism says individual beliefs aren't justified. Your entire system of beliefs as a whole is justified by being as coherent as possible. But the question is, how does coherence of your own beliefs, which are inside your mind, remember, connect to the world, which for the most part is outside your mind? Think about it. The coherence of your beliefs is just a matter of how the things within your mind connect to each other. The beliefs in your mind can be perfectly coherent without having any connection to the outside world. So one of the examples I gave last time is if you believed you were in some science fiction or fantasy story, your beliefs could be coherent as long as the story is coherent, but they wouldn't have any connection to the outside world. So why does coherence turn true beliefs into knowledge when coherence by itself doesn't seem to connect to the world? So both of these theories have problems. And around the mid-20th century, philosophers started to propose an underlying issue that was common to both foundationalism and coherentism. One problem that undermined both theories. And the proposal was that the issue with both is looking for internal verification. Once again, think about what foundationalism and coherentism are trying to do. They are both trying to figure out what makes a true belief into knowledge by appealing to things we can think about. things that are present in our mind, whether that's perfect certainty within the mind or coherence within the mind. They're both searching for ways to prove to ourselves from the inside, from our own personal perspective, that we were correct without any possible doubt. The question is, what can we prove to ourselves in that way? And what is there in the mind that can provide that proof? So around the mid-20th century, philosophers started to think that this search for internal verification is what was causing all the problems. The reason we couldn't defeat skepticism, that we couldn't prove skepticism was false, is because we were looking for this internal system of verification that just isn't there. That this is a standard we simply can't meet. Potential solution is to go external. Maybe searching for internal proof is the wrong approach to understanding knowledge. Maybe knowledge is outside the head in some sense, and I'll explain what philosophers mean by saying knowledge is partly outside the head. The resulting theory, in general terms, is called externalism about knowledge. The definition of externalism about knowledge is this. It's the claim that a person S can have knowledge based on factors that are not accessible to S. Now, I'll explain more exactly what I mean by this. But for now, what it means is somebody has a true belief. And as we saw, being a true belief doesn't automatically make a belief knowledge. There needs to be something more. Reliabilism says maybe that something more that's required beyond true belief isn't something that's within the person's mind. Maybe something completely outside of them can make their true belief knowledge. Now, both foundationalists and coherentists reject that claim. Foundationalists say, no, the thing that makes your true belief knowledge is that you can derive it from this absolutely certain foundation of beliefs that you have. Coherentists say, no, what makes your true belief knowledge is it's part of a coherent system of beliefs, and you can check the coherence of your own beliefs yourself. So this is a rather radical departure. It's saying the thing that makes your true beliefs knowledge might be something outside you entirely. Now, by itself, externalism is very general. It doesn't say anything about what is it that's external that makes your true beliefs knowledge. One specific version of externalism is reliabilism, and that's the theory we'll be focusing on today. This is probably the most prominent version of externalism. According to externalism, knowledge is true belief formed by a suitably reliable belief-forming process. So if you're wondering, what is it that a true belief needs in order to be knowledge? Well, according to reliabilism, what it needs is to have been formed using a reliable process. So think about some of our examples of things that are and aren't knowledge. One example of something that isn't knowledge is forming a belief based on a guess. Why is forming a belief based on a guess not knowledge? Well, according to reliabilism, it's not knowledge because guessing is not a reliable belief-forming process. It doesn't reliably lead to the right answer. On the other hand, why is forming beliefs based on vision under good lighting conditions a way to acquire knowledge? The answer is using vision to acquire knowledge in good lighting conditions is reliable. Usually, when you form the belief that there's a chair in front of you using your vision, that belief is true. So reliability seems to make the difference between knowing and not knowing. Of course, reliability is a somewhat vague term, so let's see if we can get more precise about what reliability is. We can define reliability for present purposes as follows. process that formed a belief that P is a reliable process just in case, first of all, if P were false, you would not believe P based on that method. Second, as long as P is true and you use that method, then you believe that P. So both components are required in order for a belief-forming process to be reliable. So once again, the idea is you used some process to form a belief. It's reliable as long as it's not going to lead you to a false belief, and it will always lead you to a true one. It seems pretty clear. So let's just go through an example to illustrate how this works. So the example is looking at a chair. There's a chair right in front of you. You look at it, you form the belief, there's a chair. Now, in this case, it seems like you know there's a chair in front of you. Why does that belief count as knowledge? Well, first of all, you used vision to form the belief that there's a chair in front of you. First of all, you have a true belief that there's a chair. So that's the first component. Furthermore, if there wasn't a chair in front of you, you wouldn't believe that there was a chair in front of you. Because in normal circumstances, if there's not a chair in front of you and you're using your vision to form your beliefs, you won't believe there's a chair. You can see that there isn't one. On the other hand, as long as you are using your vision, and as long as there is a chair, you believe it. So even if circumstances were slightly different, but you were still using your vision and there was still a chair in front of you, you would still believe there was a chair in front of you. So this is a reliable process. In normal circumstances, it gives you the right answer about whether or not there is a chair in front of you. Therefore, when you use this method to form the belief that there's a chair in front of you, you know there's a chair in front of you because it meets the conditions of reliability. So just to be clear, there are the two components of reliability. The first one is if things had been different and the thing you believe was false, this method would lead you to believe it was false. On the other hand, even if things were slightly different but your belief was still true, this method would lead you to believe it was still true. All right, so that's the difference between knowledge and not knowledge. Whereas on the other hand, think about guessing. If you make a guess about which lottery numbers won before you looked at the results, then even if a different number won, you'd probably still guess the same number. So your guess was not connected to the actual number, so whether that number actually won or not wouldn't affect the guess. So using the guessing method, you might still believe the false result, even if things were different. You see the point? I don't think I described that exactly right. But the idea is, if you're just guessing, and your guess has no connection to the truth, then if the truth changed, that wouldn't affect your guess. So you could still end up believing the same number was the right number, even if it wasn't. So there we have it. Guessing doesn't lead to knowledge. So reliability, in other words, what this is trying to do is make more precise the idea that a method is reliable just in case it has a high probability of leading to true beliefs. Now, when we've discussed lotteries, we've already seen why putting it in these terms isn't quite precise enough. So saying that it tracks the truth is more precise. So tracking the truth is what we say when a belief meets those previous two conditions. So once again, a reliable process, the best way to think of it is the previous definition. Process is reliable if, in normal circumstances, it leads you to the right answer every time. Okay. Now what this is trying to do is explain what kind of mind-world connection is necessary in order to have knowledge. Now the mind-world connection was the problem with both foundationalism and coherentism. both of them had this problem of how do we get from our own mind to knowledge about the world? Now, in this case, the connection is reliability. So there's something about the process that we use to form beliefs that's reliably connected to the world. But reliabilism is very open to what this could be. So reliabilism doesn't demand that there's any particular method that we use, as long as it's a reliable one. So that's why we can sometimes rely on reasoning methods. That's why we can sometimes rely on vision, or we can sometimes rely on hearing. We might even be able to rely on intuition or perhaps innate knowledge. As long as it's reliable, that's all that matters. So the reliability connects us to the world. It connects our beliefs to the world. So whereas coherence by itself doesn't seem to have a connection to the world, reliability does. If you have some method that reliably tells you whether there's a chair in front of you, that's a connection to the world. It's a connection to those chairs. All right, so let's go back to the idea of externalism. What's the relationship between externalism and reliability? Why is reliabilism an externalist theory of knowledge? Well, the main reason is reliability is an objective feature of a process that, more importantly, you can't necessarily tell from the inside. Thus, you can know based on facts you aren't necessarily aware of, namely facts about your own reliability. So we'll say more about this in a bit, but think about biases. Most of us have biases, but it's notoriously difficult to recognize when you're being biased. And the reason, well, there are a lot of different reasons for this, but what this shows is that you can use an unreliable process, namely a bias, without recognizing that it's unreliable. Furthermore, we don't necessarily know how vision works. Most of us can't explain in detail how vision works. So we don't necessarily know for sure that it's reliable. We can't just think about it and tell from the inside. And yet, some of those processes are reliable and some of them are not. Even though we can't tell from the inside, reliabilism still says when they are reliable, they lead to knowledge. So this means the thing that turns true beliefs into knowledge might be something we don't even know about. So I'll try to be clearer about this. I'm claiming that reliabilism is an externalist theory of knowledge. But when I say that, what am I claiming is external to what else? So first of all, what is external? Is externalism? Now what's external is the features that make true beliefs knowledge. In this case, it's the reliability of the process that formed the belief. And what is it external to? The answer is it's external to the conscious awareness of the knower. So for example, when you form beliefs based on vision, when you look at the desk in front of you and you believe this is a desk, you probably can't explain in much, if any detail at all, how vision works. Most of us have no idea about the optics that happen within the eye. Most of us have no clue what kind of chemical reactions happen in the retina that allows signals to be sent down the nerves. Most of us don't have the slightest hint how our nerves work. Most of us have no idea what happens in our brain that allows us to interpret these signals. So most of us couldn't even in vague terms describe the process of forming beliefs based on vision. I mean, that's about as deep into it as I can go. And yet, we can still know based on that process as long as that process is reliable. It doesn't matter if we can't describe it. It doesn't matter if we can't prove that it's reliable. All that matters according to reliabilism is that it is reliable. Now this is important. Reliabilism is saying that if you form a belief using a process, you don't even need to know what the process is. You don't need to know whether it's reliable. You don't need to be able to explain to anyone how you formed your belief or anything like that. You don't have to have any idea whatsoever where your belief came from. As long as it came from a reliable process, it's knowledge. All right. So first of all, let's bring up an issue with theory. One issue that a lot of people have is that it seems like this only allows us to have conditional knowledge. What I mean is, if you think about this theory, does it mean that at best we can say is, I know that there's a world around me, I know that there's a desk in front of me, assuming the process I used was reliable, but I don't really know whether the process was reliable. So some people think that this is the only kind of knowledge reliabilism gives us. Because once again, reliabilism says you can know something without knowing whether it counts as knowledge. You can know something based on a process without even knowing what the process is. So in many cases, you won't be able to explain how you know something. You won't even know if it is knowledge. This doesn't seem like it solves the problem of skepticism. Now, the response that reliabilists give is that they say, in some cases at least, you can know that you know. And they explain it this way. Knowing that you know is just like any other knowledge. Reliabilism is a theory of knowledge, after all. So saying that you know something is just claiming that you know something. Does that make sense? If I say, I know that the sun is more than 100 miles from the Earth, I know that the sun is more than 100 miles from the Earth. Now in that case, I'm just claiming to know something. What is it that I'm claiming to know? I'm claiming to know that I know that the sun is more than 100 miles from the Earth. But that's just another knowledge claim. So according to reliabilism, all it takes for that knowledge claim to be true is for my belief that I know to be based on a reliable process. So as long as I reliably believe that I know, and I do know, then I know that I know. So it isn't just conditional knowledge that reliabilism gives us. Reliabilism can admit that sometimes we know something, and further, we can explain how we know it, and know that we know it. It just says we don't always have to be able to do that. So I just want to make that clear. Reliabilism says that in order to know something, you don't need to be able to explain how. But, of course, reliabilists can admit sometimes you can. So people who know more about the visual system probably do know exactly how they know things based on vision. Or at least maybe someday we will. So that's the theory of reliabilism. Now let's look at some of the interesting implications. One of the most interesting implications is how we should study knowledge as long as reliabilism is true. So if reliabilism is true, the way we should go about studying knowledge is to try to determine which belief-forming processes are reliable and which ones aren't. That's what we should be looking at when we're studying knowledge. And so as one example of this, let's look at the study of biases and introspection. Psychologists have made a lot of progress studying biases and introspection in the lab and elsewhere. And one interesting set of experiments has to do with overconfidence. So here's one example of a bias known as the overconfidence bias. Researchers have people perform a task or take a test. Then afterward they say, how well do you think you did? But remember, you are overconfident. So the interesting thing is they've tested people before and found that most people say they did better than they actually did. So then with later test subjects, they tell them, you're going to be overconfident, so take that into account when you answer this question. How well do you think you did? Remember, you're overconfident, so correct for that. Your initial response will be something that's too high, so say something lower. And the person will think and say, I think I got a 90 on this test. And it turns out that they got an 80. So even telling people that they're going to be subject to a bias, they're still subject to the bias. There's another interesting one where it wasn't taking a test, it was playing a video game and shooting zombies. Then afterward they ask, how many zombies did you shoot? And people's estimates were absurdly high. They would say, I think I probably shot 200 zombies, and it turns out they shot 20. So this is a really interesting result. It was discovered by doing psychology experiments and repeating them and varying them and trying to understand how biases and introspections work. And so according to these results, this is a good way to study reliability. So we know, at least in this case, if you just think about how do I think I did, that's not a very reliable way of figuring out how well you did. So this shows us that this is not a reliable method. And so in general, we can raise this question about what methods we should use. So how do we learn about things like biases? And how do we learn to overcome them? Reliabilists tend to say that the method we should use is scientific study. And specifically, we should not use introspection. Once again, this goes back to the original diagnosis of the problem with foundationalism and coherentism. The thought was both of those theories focused on just introspecting, that is, thinking about our own minds, thinking about our own experience, focusing on the mind itself. Reliabilists tend to reject that idea and say the right way to study knowledge is to do scientific study of how we actually work to find out what leads to right answers. And so now here's one interesting implication of this. Let's think about reliability and certain kinds of error possibilities. So first of all, set aside the mind for now. And let's just focus on the reliability of a thermometer. Suppose you're using a thermometer to measure the temperature of some water. And somebody comes up to you and says, you know, your thermometer would be wrong if it was insulated. So you've got your thermometer here. You've got it stuck into the water. And it's not insulated. And someone says, it would be wrong if it was insulated. And they're probably right. But it seems like a reasonable response is, well, it isn't insulated, so what's your point? So if we're thinking about the reliability of a device and certain outlandish possibilities, if those possibilities aren't true, then we don't really have to worry about them. It's true that there are circumstances where your thermometer would be wrong. But if you're not in those circumstances, that doesn't matter. That doesn't mean you have to distrust your thermometer now. So that's thermometers. If your thermometer isn't insulated, it doesn't matter that it would be wrong if it was. It's not, so you can trust its result. Let's apply that to knowledge, specifically to the problem of skepticism. So let's say someone says, you know, your belief-forming processes would be really unreliable if you were in the matrix. It seems like here a reasonable response could be, well, I'm not in the matrix, so what's your point? That's basically the response to skepticism that reliabilism offers. Reliabilism says as long as we are using reliable belief-forming processes, then we do have knowledge. It doesn't matter that we might have similar experiences in the matrix. As long as we're not in the matrix and we're actually using reliable processes, that's all that matters. the fact that we can't necessarily tell from the inside whether we're in the matrix doesn't matter. What matters is what processes are we actually using. So once again, let's think about skepticism. Descartes wanted perfect internal certainty, and that led him to his foundationalist theory. That's the way he wanted to respond to skepticism. But reliabilism entirely gives up on the idea that we need internal certainty. Furthermore, reliabilism says that perhaps this internal certainty is impossible. But why should we demand internal certainty? Perhaps knowledge is outside the head. Maybe the things that make true beliefs knowledge aren't necessarily things that we can access just by thinking. Maybe it's something like reliability, and as long as our mental processes are reliable, then they can lead to knowledge. The question is this a good theory of knowledge? It really is a big departure from the way most people think about knowledge. Normally, if you think about the question, how do we know that? You think the answer will have to be something we're aware of, and that if you can't find anything you're aware of that proves something is true, then you don't really know it. But reliabilism says, no, you don't have to necessarily be aware of it. You don't have to be aware of what makes your beliefs knowledge. You might not know, just from thinking about it, how your belief formed. There are lots of processes like intuition. You might not know how vision works, how sensation of touch works. That doesn't matter. But is this a good theory? Does it make sense to say that yes, you know something even though you have no idea where that belief came from? Does it actually make sense? I will leave that question up to you as we move forward and explore the last few problems for knowledge before ending the course.